we are going to be talking about something that doesn't matter to you right now if you're 20 or 30 years old, but if you're in your 50s or 60s and you're really thinking about retiring, our topic today is really, really important. And it's going to be this kind of idea of thinking about your spending plan or your budget or whatever word you want to use for it, particularly for people who are not yet retired, but they're looking at that. And so, it's having gone through that transition with so many families over the years. It is just so common for folks to be really unsure of what that's going to be like, and it makes sense if you have been working since you were a kid and getting a regular check every month for your services, and then all of a sudden you're looking at that stopping for the first time in your life. That is a strange experience to try to get your brain around. And so a lot of times we're contacted by people who are trying to put those pieces together. And so it's not necessarily the most exciting discussion, but it's one of the more important ones. And I guess we'll start off by I'm just going to ask you, Zach, of all the things the variables that go into retirement planning, what would you say is the single most important variable when we put all the pieces into our tools and we do our thing? What do you think is the most important variable?
The most important variable is definitely cash flow, specifically expenses or the budget that somebody has. And, it's probably the anxiety that any of you watching, if you're in that stage where, you're saying, okay, retirement is 5-10 years down the road, you may be experiencing a little bit of apprehension or anxiety about, I don't know if I'm ready for this. And of course, our role is to help you figure that out. But that is a huge, huge piece in the process of us helping you do that. And so expenses specifically are massive, and it informs so much, right? It informs how money is invested, right? What does it need to do? We have a list of things that help us determine how to invest a portfolio. And the first thing is income. How much income does it need to generate? That's hard to get to unless we know how much somebody spends, right?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the whole plan, as far as retirement projections and everything, it all revolves around how much income is needed or how much is going to be spent. And we like to say around our office, we make the complex simple. Money doesn't have to be complicated. And if we were sitting in our conference room with somebody right now, I might turn around on the whiteboard and draw this little, simple diagram to kind of make this idea simple. But what we're talking about today is that red faucet at the bottom of the bucket. When you think about it, there's money coming into the top of the bucket, right? And it might be, people have, depending on their age, they have decisions to make about Social Security. When do I start it? What should I wait till 70? Should I start at 62? Should I start when I'm 67? What should I do? What about my spouse? So we make those kinds of evaluations, but at some point, got Social Security coming into the bucket. Some people still have pensions, believe it or not, right? Those are kind of becoming more and more rare, but they're still out there. Sometimes they go for just one person's lifetime, one of the spouses, and then other times they have it for both spouses, but that's another source potentially of income coming into the top of the bucket. I know we've seen many of our clients continue to work. They kind of have a semi-retirement instead of just walking off a cliff. They kind of have more of a glide. And so they might have some consulting work that they do on the side or whatever. So that's another possible source of income coming into the top of the bucket. And then if all of those, aren't enough, then we have to look at investment income, and that could be rent income from rental properties. It could be, investments from your 401k and, withdrawals there, or from your regular taxable investments. So all of that is coming in at the top. And, if there was no faucet with anything coming out the bottom, this would be a very simple exercise, right? But
Yeah.
but we don't have that. What we have is everybody's got a different size faucet. And to put this in perspective, just sometimes the simplest examples really illustrate the point. You and I were talking earlier that, let's say you've got couple A, and they look at their spending, and what's coming out of that red faucet every month is $4,000, and they've got $3,000 in Social Security coming in the top. So they only need $1,000 a month from their investments, right? But then you've got another couple B, they come in and they need $8,000 coming out of that faucet, not 4,000, but 8,000. And they also have 3,000 coming in from Social Security. So how much do they need coming in from investments? $5,000, right?
Yeah.
And you made the point, and I thought this was a great point about we've doubled the spending, but instead of 1,000, we need 5,000. So they need 5 times the level of income from their investments. And if you kind of reverse engineer that, that means theoretically they need about 5 times the amount of investment principal, right? So
Yeah.
whereas the first couple might have only needed $200,000 or $300,000 to get the job done, this other couple might need $1.5 million to get the job done.
Yeah, and it's kind of, that's surprising because you think, oh well, this person, this family is spending just twice as much of the other one, so they would need twice as much investment assets. Well,
Right.
even though they're only spending twice as much, they've quintupled the requirement on their portfolio.
Yeah.
And it's we see some situations where a small change in expenses, a small change in income can make a drastic difference on the survivability of the plan or the success of the financial plan. And it really comes down to that. You can have a small change
Mm-hmm.
in expenses that equates to a massive change on the burden put on the portfolio.
Yeah, boy, that's such a great point. And the other thing is the more, it's basically another way of saying what you were just getting at. The more of your spending needs that are met by risk-free or guaranteed sources of income, like Social Security, like pensions, the less dependent you are on investment income, right? And the less dependent you are on investment income, the less affected you are by market volatility, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the opposite is also true. And today it's becoming more and more common with the people we see, since pensions are becoming less and less common. And since lifestyles tend to be a good bit more than Social Security generates, people are coming in and maybe they need 60 or 70% or even more sometimes of their total income. That red faucet has got to come from investments, and that's fine if they've got enough saved. I mean, it works, but they're clearly going to have to be much more concerned about volatility, because if you're drawing income off of this chunk of money and we get a major market sell-off, like we've seen 3 of them in the last 15 years, you have some real pressure put on you. And so it makes what we do very interesting. It's never dull because it's always unique. It's always, customized to the situation. But anyway, that's just kind of a good way to start this conversation off. Now, let's talk about some of the really practical stuff as planners that we get into. Back in 2005, when I released the first edition of my book, one of the chapters was Ben Franklin principle. And everybody pretty much remembers, Ben Franklin is famously quoted as saying, "A penny saved is a penny earned," right? Mm-hmm. That was back when a penny was was a bigger deal than it is today, of course. But the point I made in the book was that, it's actually today that when Ben Franklin said that, there wasn't an income tax. And so today there is an income tax. And so today a penny saved is not just a penny earned, but it's a penny earned plus the tax you might have paid on that penny earned, right? So with that kind of as a backdrop, that idea, one of the things that we are very much looking at when we are analyzing this for clients is what kind of expenses are able to completely go away. Because $1 saved is like $1.10 earned, right? If we're having to either have have that income come in from IRAs or from earned income to make that dollar of expense, it's really saving us more than a dollar if we just make that dollar of expense go away. So I thought we would look at a simple example of a mortgage and just kind of use this as a way to explain this idea. But let's say you've got a hypothetical couple and they come in and their only debt is $100,000 left on their mortgage. And their principal and interest on that mortgage is $1,000 a month. So 1,000 times 12, that means if they have that mortgage, part of what's coming out of that red faucet in their bucket is this 12,000 a year to make the mortgage payment, right? So let's say that that same couple also has a bunch of cash sitting around, and what's cash earning today?
Zero.
Zippo,
Pretty
Zippo, right? And so it's understandable. The markets are frothy. They're volatile, and so it's understandable to have more cash. But you're looking at that and you're saying, okay, I want to think about this rationally, and what's the best use of my money? Well, what this simple mathematical calculation here tells us is that if I had 200,000 of investments and I was going to pull, I'm not saying earn, but I'm saying if I was going to pull 6% a year out of that investment pool, that's how much I would have to have at 6% withdrawal to make the $12,000 of payments a year, right?
right, and that actually corresponds with what we might the investment return we might see in a moderate to moderately conservative portfolio over time.
Yeah. Yeah. So there would be investment risk on that. There would certainly be no guarantee, but just to make that $12,000, what we're saying here is you would need at least to be realistic here. You'd be at least $200,000 generating income at a 6% withdrawal. If you were a little more conservative and you said, well, I don't want to pull 6%. What if I pulled only 5%? Well, then you would need about 240,000. If you wanted to be even more conservative and say, well, I don't want to run out of money. I want to be more conservative on my returns. Then you might need 300,000 to be able to support 4%. But there's another option. What is it, Zach?
Well, you could get rid of that expense.
Yeah, you could just pay the $100,000 off, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, I can't tell you how many. Well, you know this. You've been in the meetings, but people are often shocked when. I mean, here we are. We manage money for a living, right? That's a big part of our service. And but we tell people regularly, you should pay this mortgage off. It's the best thing for you to do. Because we're looking at this and we're saying, look. It doesn't make sense for you've got the money, go ahead and pay the loan off and make that 12,000 go away. So in effect, what we just did is we took that faucet, that red faucet on the bucket, and we kind of closed it a little bit, right? So there's not as much water coming out of the bucket now. So you don't need as much going in the top. It makes all the sense in the world, very common sense. But we really take a look at things and sometimes it might be not a mortgage, it might be car payments. And people start to think about it and they think, well, I've always replaced my car every 3 years. Well, are you going to keep doing that? Well, maybe, are you going to do that till you're 90? Well, probably not. So you have those discussions and they might have $700-800 in their faucet that is car payments that don't really have to be there, right? And so we can start looking at that. Sometimes sometimes they're still trying to help their adult kids with some student loans, or they've got some credit card debt that they've just never gotten around to cleaning up. I mean, there's all of these little things out there that if they've got the resources to pay them off, it's not unusual for that, in our estimation as planners, to be the best investment they can make with that cash sitting on the side.
Yeah. And there's the numbers side of this, but there's the emotional side of these payoff decisions. And something I know that we usually see, especially when somebody's going in retirement, is they are looking for an increased level of predictability. Mm-hmm. And If we have a balance in a portfolio that's invested and it needs to generate a return, right? No one knows what the market's going to do. And so that balance, it's 300,000 might, if we get into a volatile market, maybe at some point it's down to 220 or 240. And so when we pay off, uh, a mortgage, in this case, a mortgage like this, it is bringing more predictability to the entire financial picture. And so
Yeah.
even in this world we're living in today where mortgage rates are, 2.5% or under in some cases, and then we're looking at the money we can earn, even in situations where you could say, oh, well, I can earn more than my mortgage is costing me. A lot of people don't want to prioritize that in the retirement stage of life. They're looking for predictability, and this is one way to really easily obtain that.
Yeah, and it's a great example of we've mentioned already that how every situation is unique. Not everybody has an extra 100,000 in cash sitting around, right? But what they might have is a lot of equity in their home. And so let's say that this same scenario, um, they don't really have the cash to be able to pay off the $100,000 mortgage, but let's say they've also got a car loan over here for $30,000, and that payment's $700 a month, and they might have 2 or 300,000 of equity in their home, and they haven't refinanced their mortgage in 5 years, and so today they're paying 5%, but they could refinance and get 2.75%. And oh, by the way, they could talk with their mortgage expert about the possibility of doing a cash out refinance, paying that car off and rolling that into the mortgage. And by the time all the numbers wash out, the interest that they're saving on the refinance could more than offset the fact that they owe more on the mortgage because they've saved so much by making the car payment go away, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's all these levers you can pull, and it's always custom to each person's situation. The ideal is we get it paid off and we're just done with it. If they've got resources to do that, that's always a great thing to look at as an attractive option. So let's look at one more angle on this discussion, Zach. Let's get a little more down into the weeds, and we will sometimes actually lay it out this way for people because it really is helpful if you're that 59-year-old or 63-year-old or whatever stage of life you're at, and you're getting ready to retire, and you're going from this world of getting a regular check to not having a regular check. And I found no more helpful way over the years for people to really look at this honestly than to get to the place where we can look at it just item by item. And so in this case, on the left column here today, we've got a column of this is approximately what they would be spending while they're working. And then retired, we're kind of looking down the line and saying, this is the best I can guess what would change. Some things go down, some things might go up. So let's just kind of walk through this. Generally, homeowners, household expenses, homeowners insurance, property taxes, homeowners dues, these kinds of things, they don't tend to change when you retire unless you're going to sell your house and downsize. Some people do that.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, let's assume that they don't make any change. They stay in the house they're at. Then we get into automobiles. We already, really the big change here would typically be if there's a payment, and then we might do that debt, strategy we talked about. But we do sometimes see, this example isn't showing it, but sometimes people are commuting and putting a lot more miles on their cars when they're driving back and forth to work, and that's going to stop, and they start to think, oh yeah, that might save me $150 a month in gas. And oh, by the way, I take the text tag, and that runs me $100 a month on the toll road. That's going to go away. So there can be changes there, and until you kind of start looking at it item by item, you might not be really thinking about that. But we haven't shown any difference here. Now, one of the things that's pretty universal is in the area of the financial stuff that you're doing while you're an employee. And obviously, when you stop getting that check, a lot of those things stop. So savings might be what? 401k, thrift plan, 403b if you're a nonprofit, those kinds of things. Presumably, you're not going to be making those contributions anymore after you retire, right?
Right.
Retirement
And a lot
plan,
of times you're not able to, if you're not working and you don't have earned income, you really couldn't do that in the way that you were before anyways.
right. More and more employees are in it, work for employers where they have some sort of a mandatory plan contribution. Teachers are an example of this. They have to put money into the TRS system. University employees have to choose either the TRS system or the optional retirement plan, and so it's kind of instead of Social Security, they're putting that in. You could say Social Security taxes here too. We haven't. I don't know if we've listed that on this particular comparison, but that's another one of those things that you're paying while you're working, and that goes away. The taxes, except for Part B of Medicare. Um, Other charitable giving, that could just be stuff that you do not on maybe your regular charitable giving, but these are just kind of one-off things. So we haven't really changed that there. An example of something that might go up would be vacations, travel. A lot of times people, especially early in their retirement, they think, we want to put more priority on taking those trips, one or two a year. And so we've shown that in blue here because that would be an example where your expense might actually go up after you retire. But things like cable and internet and eating out, those just depends on each person. You look at health and medical expenses. Sometimes people are paying for a lot of their life insurance through employee payroll deductions, right? For group insurance, that might go down. Disability insurance is definitely, if you're not working, you're not insurable for disability insurance, so that premium goes away. Medical insurance depends on your situation. Here, we're not showing it change, but a lot of times that is a big change for people. If you're retiring before you're 65 and you're not eligible for Medicare, for example, then you might have a year to a year and a half of COBRA rates where this might go up. Where if you are going to have a longer period in that, what do they go out to the exchange sometimes, and they have to maybe be paying a lot more than they were used to. So that could be an area where expenses went up. Long-term care insurance, sometimes people are paying for that through the employer, sometimes not. So it might change if it's an employee deduction at your employer, but if you're paying for it already yourself, it's generally going to stay the same. Unreimbursed medical expenses, those are just things that you pay out of your pocket. And then you got miscellaneous things. We haven't really shown anything different there. So obviously there's a lot of different variables. We haven't hit on every possibility here, but the important thing is we're trying to get a realistic picture of how much our spending today is going to go down the day after we retire.
Yeah. And I would say, in this case, we're looking at maybe a 25% reduction in overall spending. And that's probably a little bit on the high side, even just because in this case, there's a lot of travel expenses for work. And this person was saving a lot prior to retiring.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they're saving on the income tax side of things, but maybe someone's not their travel expenses aren't as high, or they weren't saving as much, or they have, extra vacations. And so whether it's looking at the change going into retirement, another thing that we often see that is a consideration when looking at your expenses when you retire, a lot of people assume that, when their spouse passes away, that their expenses are going to go down, and that's just not something that we see. I mean, maybe they had some insurance or something, or maybe they were traveling together, and the surviving spouse is not motivated to travel. But by and large, I would say that a surviving spouse, we may see a 10% drop in the expenses. So it's really important to try to get some clarity here as much as we can. And it often involves going through in this methodic approach, almost this accounting exercise here.
Yeah, and I just realized one topic of spending that I skipped over. I touched on the other charitable giving, but I failed to mention tithing and church giving. A lot of times people are giving a regular percentage based on their earned income. And so in this case, we've shown that dropping maybe from $30,000 a year to $15,000 a year. Everybody has their own thoughts about how they want to approach that, but sometimes as planners, we can inject ideas like donor advised funds we've talked with so many people about in the past year, especially, where it might affect your cash flow that you need month to month or year to year by doing your giving in a more tax smart way, where you give less often but in greater amounts, and you get a better tax result out of that. So there's levers that we can fiddle with on this, and ultimately, though, we need to figure out, when we've got a solid plan for somebody, what is realistically coming out of that dadgum bucket at the bottom of it, right? How much money is coming out of that faucet? And then that, as you said earlier, Zach, that allows us to back up and figure out what the portfolio needs to be doing. How much income is needed immediately, or soon, or in the future? What kind of an overall growth rate is necessary to support the plan long term? And then, of course, we've got to weigh all of that against what these are human beings we're dealing with. How much can they deal with the volatility that is not maybe going to happen? It's definitely going to happen. And so, there are ways we can control and set that. We call it, setting your risk budget. All of those things are part of a plan for retirement. But today we wanted to just make the point, and hopefully put an exclamation point after it, that of all of the variables we can talk about, the single most impactful one is, what is it going to cost you to support your lifestyle? How much spending does it take? So with that, Zach, we're out of time. We got a couple of minutes. I know next week you're going to be leading us through a discussion that actually is pretty timely. Why don't you just give us 30 seconds on what that's about, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking a little bit next week about indexes, specifically stock market indexes, and something. If you're you may be saying, hey, what is this S&P 500 or this NASDAQ or the Dow? And what is it doing, and how does my portfolio compare? And so you might have some questions about, is that relevant to me? Should I pay attention to that? What is that index anyways, right? What actually is that? And so we're going to be diving a little bit into that next week about what actually those are and what they mean, and the information that really is useful to you from those.
All right, guys. Well, we always enjoy spending time with you. Thank you for showing up. And this will be up on our website here probably in 3 to 5 business days. So anybody who might need to hear this, you can always share it with them that way if you'd like to. You guys be safe. Have a great day. Thanks again. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.